This is Deep Dish Conversations, a series in which I, Jerome Moore, sits down with prominent figures in Nashville, Tennessee to talk about social issues over amazing deep dish pizza. Deep Dish Conversations models how to have conversations about deep issues around racism, housing, policing, poverty, and more. Plus, you will get an idea for where to get your next slice of pizza from. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy Deep Dish Conversations. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Deep Dish Conversations. And today we have representatives from Safer Schools Nashville. We have Marcus Trotter Lockett, that is hyphenated, and we have Emma Crownover. I almost said crossover because I'm thinking of basketball, but it's Emma Crownover. All right, interesting last names, both of them. But I'm only going to be referring by their first names because it's too many names. Welcome, man. I appreciate y'all for being here.
Yeah.
So how y'all been?
We're good.
Good. I just graduated school, so I'm back in Nashville.
Oh, wow. Welcome to adulting.
Yeah, I'm adjusting to this very different city from when I left it, but I'm good. I'm doing well.
How about you, Emma?
I'm good. No, I'm enjoying the summer. I got school starting in August. Yeah, it's been good.
That's good. Yeah, I just been just working, just doing this.
Yep.
But what's funny is that we've been in communication through this whole pandemic, like really working on like real like community stuff, especially in schools. And this is our first time seeing each other in person. And it's really...
I walked in and gave you a big old hug. I'm like, this man doesn't really know me. Like, he knows me, but he's never really
No, it's even weird, though. I mentioned it to Emma. I was like, yeah, this is like my first time ever seeing you. And I went to the bathroom. I said, this is my first time seeing Marcus. Like, I've seen this black man before.
Yeah, literally.
But let's get straight into it because you all are a new organization, fairly new, but have done a lot of, made up a lot of ground in, I think, a shorter amount of time for what I know, working with you all personally. So just break down who Safer Schools Nashville is, your mission and purpose, and then we can get into like some meaty, like possibly controversial things that you all are trying to advocate for in the city of Nashville.
Possibly.
Yeah, just possibly. Just, things that you all want to advocate for in Nashville.
Yeah, you joined, I guess, in that first initial group before me. But it's pretty much all been elicited by kind of the trauma of 2020. That was a weird, I think, bad year for all of us. And I, was in college in California. I wasn't here. I think you were you here at that point?
Mm-hmm.
You were here at that point. But after George Floyd, there was a large call. We're all ex-MNPS students, so all of us went to Hume Fog. We were in the same grade at Hume Fog. A lot of the other kids we work with, I can say adults we work with, were also grades above us, or around the same grades as Hume Fog. And there was a kind of a call to action after George Floyd. It was a weird, kind of uncomfortable conversation about we don't like what our country looks like. We don't like what the world around us looks like. What can we do as people who care to change that? And that was the beginnings of what's now been a year and a half, which blows my mind, Safer Schools. So we stole FUBU's slogan, for students, by students. Our idea was as ex-students in an MNPS, how can we advocate for the social emotional well-being and mental well-being of students, work towards advocating for what their needs are during the pandemic. And the biggest thing is how do we approach discipline within metro schools in a way that is best for students, including removing SROs from schools, including reallocating money towards more beneficial programs for students within schools, and kind of having perspective of saying these kids, spend their entire lives in MNPS before college,
right,
and they have no say in anything involved. So how as an organization could we, I guess, give back in some way for the people we think were most vulnerable within, I guess, schools during what we saw was a really tumultuous time in this country. And students, there's that cliche phrase, are the future, but they can't be anything if they have no voice.
Right.
So that's kind of where we came from, that's what we're about, and we've been on that for, I don't think any of us expected, a year and a half now.
I'm curious, and I'll start with you, Emma. What made you want to get involved? Because, hell, when I was in high school, the last thing I was thinking about is really social justice issues. I'm just give me less homework and I'd be fine. You can come on out here, you can bring it out. And so I'm curious to kind of know, your individual kind of takes on what made you want to be a part of Safer Schools Nashville and be a part of that movement? Why was it important for you as an individual and then come together with a collective of like-minded people?
I mean, I think that it is important to note that like we aren't in high school anymore, right? We have COVID gave us this free time and gave us and the movement of George Floyd and everything that happened after that gave us this momentum. But it is rooted in our high school experience and our education in Nashville. We all grew up in Nashville. We all went to MNPS schools our whole lives. But the really unique thing about going to a school downtown is that it's not a zone school. So we came from all over Nashville and we come from very different perspectives, but we are all noticing the same problem. And I think something like the moment that it happened for me was when I think I was talking to Kosar and we were talking about how other cities are like having these movements where they're getting cops out of schools and they get to go to public schools that don't have police in them. Whether or not having a cop has been specifically like harmful to someone, but just neutrally having that be something that our city is investing in. And I think we just had this moment where we were like, we don't like we deserve to have that too, and our city deserves to have that too. And like if we got to go to school and having these other professionals there and like with the actual tools to help our students, that's something that like we want to advocate for the people that come after us.
How about you, Marcus? And let me go back. They are a graduate and still a junior in college. So Safer Schools, they wasn't in high school. Y'all was finished with high school.
Yeah. I don't know that I would have had the time in high school. Like,
so, let me recant that. They're not in high school. These are, they didn't just skip to college that quick. They were not in high school. But before we carry on, we got this piece out here, and I want you all to enjoy. So look, I usually get this. We all got the same thing: spinach margarita.
Okay.
That has a thin crust, and they have the deep dish. You can have a little bit of everything. I do the thin crust because I'm trying to get thinner. I'm trying to. This came from a workout, and so let's partake, and then we can continue. So
that has been something rewarding about our work, because we've done a lot of workshops and just kind of interactions with not only student organizations but like students within actual schools, and they make me feel bad about myself in high school. Man, they're very put together, they're so intelligent, so thought out about a lot of these things. And me, I was going home playing Xbox every day. So things have changed, I think, a little bit.
He's still going home and playing Xbox.
It's not a huge difference, but it blows my mind some of the conversations we've had with students, because they have opinions on these things, and I
mean, they're experts. They're the experts, and I think that's something that we forget, is that like experts on schools are the students.
Right. Yeah, and that's awesome. And the awesome thing about Safer Schools is that y'all are actually like giving the people that are being affected the most of voices, right? And not letting us other adults and people who are not in high school anymore, like try to figure out what they want. And right, that's I guess in organizing work in general, that can happen if you're not careful, right? Making decisions for communities that you're not a part of, not affected in the same way, or not including in the work that you're trying to like find solutions for, or problems you're trying to find solutions for in the work. And so that's why I want to have you all really on here, because what have the students been saying about like some of the things that they are facing in our MNPS schools?
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing I noticed on something that I think was exacerbated by COVID in a very, very negative way is support. I think the idea of, we try to explain to people in these conversations when we talk about having the requisite number of like nurses or school counselors, psychologists, or having someone who could replace an officer to deal with social emotional well-being, things like that. Is we have a question we used to ask in workshops with students. It's like, who is your biggest like kind of network of support at your school? And the answer was always one of two things: a teacher or a coach. And that's awesome. That relationship, I've had relationships like that when I was in school. They were life-changing for me. They're important. But what would be interesting about that is you could have in one meeting 3 or 4 kids say the same teacher's name, which then, to me, in my mind, spirals to, okay, there's about, 800 kids in that school, 900 kids in that school. So how many more after those 3 or 4 kids are saying her name?
Right.
And that's been something where it seems pretty straightforward that we want our kids to be supported and kind of uplifted in the best way possible in their school, because that's the place of learning, a place where they're supposed to kind of be cultivating their futures, through not only just education, but kind of building themselves as people. And we don't seem to have any push at all to do that. And that's been something that's been brought up a bunch of times, is during COVID especially, we had meetings with Mayor's Youth Council, which is an organization of students who interact with the mayor. We had conversations with students at kind of certain schools that are considered to be kind of those, I guess, more problematic, which I hate to use that term because I think that's the wrong way to associate it, but just based on how MNPS categorizes more problematic schools when it comes to discipline. And the biggest thing was, I have no one to talk to when I'm in trouble. I have no one to have a conversation with when I need help with college. I have no one, or I have a teacher who will talk to me or help me, and there's 25 other students in her classroom at the same time at lunch, because who else are they going to talk to too? And that's just something I think is wholly unfortunate, and I think even worse, normalized. I think we bring up having the normal amount of nurses, psychologists, and school counselors, and I think people kind of scoff at that because, like, yeah, we're close, and I'm like, oh, that's not enough.
Right. What is enough? Like, what is that ratio? I think I know, but is it like 1 to 250?
It's
Is that
250
like
to 1.
Okay.
But that's like the max.
National, yeah, right.
That is like, you're pushing it.
Right.
And I think right now we're at 350 to 1 in MNPS. So like 250 is the very maximum. But could you imagine being a school counselor and you have 250 students?
That you gotta try to counsel and help with all sorts of different problems in a unique way.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been in meetings where, especially when I was still college. I mean, that was not that long ago. I shouldn't say it like that.
Last month.
Last month when I was still in college. But no, we've had meetings where kids have stayed after Zoom workshops to be like, so you're in college, like, what was your entrance exam like? How did you get, like, because I was in California and people always like, oh, how did you get all the way out there, this and that. And I'm like, do you not have anyone else to ask about this? And they literally do not.
Well,
they're sitting there talking to me for 20 minutes because, my counselor's like, I couldn't meet with her, so I have this question about this. You may know something about this.
And going even like onto when you ask students like what keeps them safe and like what does support look like for students, I think something that we get wrong about trauma is that the difference between what makes something, like, we have all probably been through something, an event that would be considered trauma, whether that's loss or grief or some sort of harm. But the difference between whether trauma lives in your body, especially as a young person, is not what happened, but rather who is there for you after it happens. So that is what makes a difference between, like, that affects the way you do in school. Like, you can't learn if you don't have anyone to support you through something.
Right.
And I think that is the biggest thing that we've heard from students. And then more importantly, when we ask them what keeps them safe, not a single time has a student said the cop, the SRO, the security officer.
And the SRO is that school resource officer, which is a police officer. But
with a gun, with cuffs, with arresting powers.
Right. And so this is a hot topic here, right? This is the topic here. But before we get into that, I'm interested in knowing, what is our school board doing or not doing? Metro, Board of Education. What are their takes for those who may not be aware? And what should they be doing?
Well, I'll do my...
Because several schools have research.
Yeah, I'll give my politician's disclaimer at the outset, just to kind of save my own ass. But COVID has complicated things a lot. I think we understand that. I think there's a lot of good things that happened in this past budget cycle that improved things. FCL wasn't fully funded, which we'll talk about in a second. But it was funded, I think.
What is SEL?
Social emotional learning was not fully funded, but it's I think the highest one it's been in, I think, ever. Teachers got a pay raise. There was an increase in the investment for teachers, especially for veteran teachers. I think got an even higher pay raise than new teachers. And there was commitment by the mayor and the council with support from the school board about having continued influx of funding for schooling over the next 2 budget cycles. Those are 2 big, important initiatives. Now, that being said, that is a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. And that's something that I think where we have had an issue is it's been a big pass the buck contest. We started out with the school board, and they said, "Hey, we love what you guys are trying to do. This is great. Work on this. You guys are going to go far with this. Go talk to the council." All right, you go to the council. The council says, "Oh, this is great. This is awesome." The mayor has discretion over the budget. Go talk to the mayor. Then that was also coupled with, the police also, they have discretion because they're officers. Go talk to the police. That was 3, 4, 5 meetings. That was another 3 or 4, 5 meetings.
They love meetings.
Yeah, we were back to the
They
council.
love meetings.
They were like, "Oh yeah, this people are interested. These people are interested." I mean, there was even, I think, before, and you might know, you were there, so you might know better about this. But before the budget was passed, there was a bill introduced. I think I'll let you speak on that because I don't remember the exact details of the bill specifically, but I think it was introduced as reallocating funding from SROs.
Yeah.
If I remember
So there
correctly.
was during the budget process, there was a last minute amendment introduced. So it was actually a little bit too late, and that might have had something to do with it, but also it didn't pass. It was specifically what we're asking for. So reallocating the $6.8 million that it pays for SROs directly to MNPS.
Right.
And the council did not vote on it, and a lot of their issues were, have we talked to the school board?
Have we talked to who?
How we talked to the school board? Has anyone talked to the school board about
Have we
this?
talked to the school? Have we? Yeah, it's like this crazy. They just send us in circles, and I think that's something that we've learned in the last year is that.
So I guess to encapsulate all that, I think the biggest issue we see with
They're not doing
powers that-
anything.
They don't. They just start dragging their feet.
Beyond that, I think is no one wants to take that stance of being the person who's pushed that movement forward of getting rid of SROs. And I think beyond that, we always try to explain to people it's not so just unifaceted of an issue where it's just getting rid of SROs. There is a multitude of research and things involved going beyond that into it's not only just getting rid of them, it's replacing them with the right kind of tools.
Right.
It's the idea of reallocating funding in specific ways. It's the idea of having a specific investment in mental well-being, mental health well-being in schools and programs to deal with that. And that's something that's not even just as simple as we need to remove cops. There's ideas. We talked about students. One of the ideas from students, this is from people in the Mayor's Youth Council, was what if we had a mental health center in the middle of downtown? Any student could have a key card to get into. There would be counselors there that any student could show up whenever they wanted to. I'm not saying that that's something that's going to happen or has to happen. That's just a student said that in a meeting with the mayor.
Right.
I've heard nothing about it since.
Right.
There's things where I think what frustrates us is there is a political calculation of what is the worst if I do this, what is the worst if I do nothing, and I think people keep skewing towards that latter answer of
Do nothing.
yeah, I could do nothing and still kind of get away with this not being a huge issue for me.
And so internally, because we know how politics can be, kind of how it goes.
We
It's
learn-
really
we
slow.
learn very quickly.
We learn really quickly. Go talk to this person, go talk to that person, go in this meeting, go in that meeting. Oh, not this year, maybe next year, maybe not this budget, but next budget, and that becomes like an habitual thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So internally, what can Safer Schools do, I guess, to be kind of more radical or more aggressive? Because a lot of times you see the writing on the wall, maybe want to ignore it and be kind of hopeful, right? But sometimes your first initial kind of feeling and what you see is kind of this is how it's going to be unless we kind of maybe push the envelope a little further or do something more radical. That's really maybe not radical, just do something that's more necessary, I would say. And so how is Safer Schools looking internally on what you all can do that is maybe more necessary, knowing the pushback and the runaround that council, school board, the mayor, all of the decision makers, they can make the things possible that's actually needed for our kids, for our students here in Nashville Public Schools?
Well, and we mentioned that budgetary. I was in. I think I just got off work. I was just kind of I had a baseball game or something on. I don't like baseball, but it's something you put on. You get home from work, you put baseball on, and it's just there's something on the TV. Like baseball, and I was doing really not much. And I get a text about the budgetary because they did change it. It used to be the budget debate, and now we're in 2021, so they've now made the budget discussion. I think is the new phrasing for it. But that was happening. Everyone's hitting on the text. Her co-star was one of the our members of our group, Matthew Tolbert. All these people are hitting up for text. And I'm just like what's the issue? And the fact that we are at a point now where someone on as performative as it may be, because it was quite performative, it will introduce a bill to say we want to reallocate funds from SROs and from the police out of schools. That is a momentous step from where we were a year and a half ago. So that momentum is there, and it's now about building off of that. And this is, and I wouldn't say it's an organizational opinion, my personal opinion, that involves in high degree, I think, a cultural shift in Nashville. There's a weird, I think, hope with how Nashville's changed and who's moving here, that there's this like, almost like liberal, carpetbaggers coming down and, ready to kind of make us this new kind of progressive city. Mm-hmm. Their kids go to private school. Their kids go to whatever school they want to go to or they can pay for. They're not involved in this. And the fact that our schools are based on property taxes has not improved our schools because they live where they want to live and their kids go to schools they want them to go to. Right. So that weird, I've heard that fantasy about us becoming this it city and that's going to improve everything. That fantasy is not going to happen.
Right.
So I
that's
think
always the question, right? Yeah. Like, who is it city? Like, who's it for, right?
Yep, exactly.
Right.
And so that's not going to happen. So for us, it's kindling off that momentum, working towards, now that COVID's over, the idea of being able to do like public action, being able to do kind of public events, being around with people more and more and more. Mm-hmm. And I think the biggest thing about that cultural shift is still demonstrating to people. I've talked to parents, which is something we don't get, I think, enough of in this organization to do. But I've had conversations with parents, conversations with people in my neighborhood have come up to me. We had a cookout for right before the 4th of July in my neighborhood. People came up being talked to about like, oh, you're in Sabre schools. I heard about this. And about their whole thing is like, oh, I didn't even know what the school to prison pipeline was. I didn't even know the detrimental, effects of police in schools. I didn't even know that, oh my God, like my stat I always throw out at you at meetings is, 97% of the people who deal with police referrals in schools are special needs. Right. Things like that where we don't even know the detriment of that's being done in this system. Right. So that raising that awareness among adults, our students know, they talk about it with us all the time. So raising that awareness, I think, in parents and making this an issue of not, oh my God, they're defunding the police, but no, what are we going to do best for our students? Because if we want to do what's best for our students, it's this. And everything points towards that. And
that's why I wanted to bring you all in here to debunk some myths. Yeah. Because a lot of people, and maybe I would say, when I say people, parents per se, would have the perception that police actually keep students safer. But what does Safer School say about that?
Yeah, I mean, Marcus,
is there data to back that up, or?
I mean, it depends on how I think we start when we're talking to students is like, can you define safety? Mm-hmm. And like, what does safety mean? And if safety means not having an active shooter, well, we have studies that show that in 197 instances of gun violence in schools since 1997, police officers have intervened 3 times.
Wow.
And if we know anything, that's not a lot.
That's not a lot. Since 1997, yeah.
And I was a humanities major. I can't give you the percentage, but it's low.
Wow.
So if that's something that we're interested in preventing, we know that you can prevent that by having non-punitive risk assessment, having trainings for teachers to be able to identify students who are in crisis, and then back to like having people that can actually support them in crisis.
Right. So it seems like it's a lot of stakeholders in this, right? And there's I think the most important stakeholders are the students, right? Which people tend not to listen to because they're students. And then you have, I think, the parents. And I'm interested in understanding, what are you all hearing from parents? Are they aware of what's going on? Do they care? And kind of what's your research and what's your findings with the conversations you've had told you about the parents' perspectives on all of this policing, getting SEL resources in schools, or what do they feel that their kids need to be better?
I think a standard kind of feeling that I've gotten, and this is not even just conversation with parents involving us, but just conversation with anyone I know who are parents in general, as someone who's lived my entire life here, is there's a very lukewarm middle feeling of, I either don't know that they're doing anything bad, so they're just normalized, they're just something that's in schools that I'm used to, or my student, could potentially be put in danger because of what's happening in this country with mass shootings, things like that, so that he has to be there. And I think the biggest most powerful anecdote or I guess response we've had to that is just the disparity when it comes to not only just race but ability.
So what is that disparity?
So you're doing the fact where I don't know the specific number. I don't remember the specific number of how many African American Black students make up the population of MNPS.
40%.
40%. They make up around, I think, upwards of 60 to 70% of referrals to police officers.
I think it's 77. It's 40 to 77.
So it's 40-77.
What's going on, everybody? This is your host and creator of Deep Dish Conversations, Jerome Moore, and I know you're enjoying this episode that you're watching currently. Make sure you hit that notification button and hit subscribe so you won't miss any of these amazing episodes. I appreciate y'all. Thank you for all love and support, and continue watching the episode.
And I think the issue that I think pisses me off is I think there's a lack of respect of the general kind of capacity and ability of students to be human. I think there's a dehumanizing aspect of this is something I am older than, this is something I know more than, and this is something I have to deal with at a level of almost like, wrangling animals more than dealing with actual people.
Right.
And I think once you kind of understand the aspect of this is not something that you manage, but something that feels and is upset for a specific reason and has to deal with things either at home or around, or even at the high school, who works, who has to take care of siblings, who has just as much of these stressors and kind of bigger, and maybe a bit less of a level as we do as adults, but almost approaching that level. Once I think you understand that, you have to kind of create programs that aren't to mitigate the annoyance of that situation you're put in as a principal or a teacher, or I guess even still, it's because they're in schools, SROs or someone like that. But the idea of I have to mitigate a situation of a human being who's in crisis or in trouble. And I think that's the issue we run into, is programs like that exist. And there are a multitude. It's not just like we're saying or advocating for one. There's a multitude to choose from. And they're all better than a policeman who has quite literally jurisdiction over an entire school with no boss above him. I don't think people understand that. It's something I've actually been waiting to bring up, that I want to bring up and make readily clear. MNPS has a memorandum of understanding with Metro Police.
Right.
And that's about it.
Right.
So funding for SROs in schools is controlled by MNPD. The jurisdiction within schools over officers is controlled by MNPD. The pretty much idea of the comings and goings of officers, what they're going to do in those schools, is controlled by MNPD.
Right.
So we've talked to principals who've talked about, I've had students who've been fighting or have something that's gone on where they've had it sent to my office to be dealt with, and I've said, this is yada yada who has this trouble in his life. We know about this struggle.
Right.
I'm his principal, this is his teacher, we both know this, we know this, we're way more well-versed than you. And their SRO has been like, I don't care, we're arresting him, he's going to jail. And that's something they have the discretion fully to do. And so my whole thing is, if we're okay with that, then there's a deeply, deeply seated issue in this district and in this city.
And we, Dr. Battle, you're more than welcome to come on Deep Dish Conversations. I did send you an email just to put it out there, because I think these are questions we need answers to. And if we know there are alternative solutions to police officers in school, why not implement them? It just does. It just and when you don't have to, it's just a MOU. It is not like it's not a statute. It's not a policy. Like both parties at any time can say, we don't want to. This is not working out for us. But it's I think a funding thing, right? Money's involved in that for MNPD anyway, right? But like MNPS could say, we don't think this is healthy for our students, and so let's disband this SRO thing and get a different professional that can actually help our kids, right?
Well, I'll have to call in our legal team on this. We don't have a legal team, but I like saying that. But my understanding, even the state, because we try to avoid the state as much as possible, because
it's Tennessee.
There's some nut. I hate to say it, but they're nut jobs. Yeah. So we try to avoid the state legislature as much as possible. But my understanding is the state statute for school safety does not specify specifically being, I think, police having to be in schools. There is the idea, I think, disciplinary and safety being related to police officers having some like regulatory kind of position within there, but it's not specified what that funding is for safety-wise.
Right.
So that means and I always try to explain this to people when we talk about cops. We don't, we don't hate cops. I don't think they're all evil devil people who are going to ruin all of our lives. They're problematic, and they're a system and institution that we refuse to reform, and because of that, incredibly deals with incredibly bad issues within that. And my whole thing is, our SRO, I had the same SRO from 8th grade that we had throughout all of high school. I knew the guy for 5 years. nice man, amazing man. I had a good relationship with him. You know, you spend time at lunch with him because he was just walking around doing nothing all the time.
You didn't
Great
do
guy.
anything.
But my biggest thing I tell people about that is, because that's the main thing they bring up is like, what was your relationship with your restaurant? Me having a friend with the guy with the gun in my school was about the most he did for my school.
Right.
And that, to me, when I have the specific situation of where we had to have time slot meetings as one I considered one of the better public high schools in the region, time slotted meetings with guidance counselors where I got 10 minutes to talk about, hey, I need to go to college, where am I going to go? That is, to me, the funny aspect of all of this.
And he's getting paid like twice as much
He's
as
getting
her.
paid more than her. So that, to me, it's logical and it makes sense, and I just think at this point it's demonstrating that kind of logical position to people, because it's not something I think can be really strongly argued against beyond. At this point, I think it's recruitment.
Right.
I mean, there's the active, I think, delineation for what they're doing or kind of changing about officers now is one, MNPD wants SROs as a future plan under Chief Drake become more of not just safety, but a mentorship, just not disciplinary, but mentorship and counseling role, which because they're trained in that, obviously. Which
What they,
I don't understand.
40 hours, 50
I
hours?
just I don't understand how that was even how that wasn't laughed out of the room and it was proposed.
Right.
Also implementing more of a police presence in elementary schools in a mentorship role, having programs that kind of are dealing with students at a level where like we're gonna run like field days, we're gonna have camps, things like that. I mean, I don't know if you saw this. I had to laugh at this because this is the most dystopian thing I've seen in a while. The MNPD in New York, NYPD, sorry, NYPD in New York has a roaming video game car now. It's like a giant bus for students and kids to come play video games in NYPD. And this is about 2 years after they were accused of stealing DNA off Coke cans. They were having it public events for students.
And that's
it's just things like that where it's like
okay,
how
come
can
on. Like it's like you have to automatically assume it's like an alternative motive, like mentoring.
Oh, yeah.
And my thing is, this has always been my thing with like MNPD is like, where are the stats or the facts that proves that your presence is beneficial?
I think that's the most frustrating thing is that they don't have to prove it. Like we're over here doing all this calculus to try and be like 97% of our students that are getting arrested have a disability. Why can you not?
Right.
But they don't have to prove that their presence. It's all like just emotional.
Right.
And,
I mean,
like, we feel that
That's been
we
admitted,
want to be
oh
okay.
yeah,
That's
they
crazy.
feel
We've
safe.
had meetings with meetings I think you might have been in with the police department where they said they will be better at this job than we will. That was admitted in meetings with the police department.
And this is a disclaimer for people that are listening. We do have maybe a couple episodes from now, Captain Carlos Laura will be joining us.
Captain Laura, I remember him.
Yeah, and so he will be joining us, and you'll get to hear MNPD's perspective on this, which should be interesting. But you can compare the two, and it's deep this conversation. So we're gonna get deep, and we're gonna ask the hard questions and give everybody an opportunity to express themselves, and leave it up for the public to depend, and do the research, and be aware of both sides, right? Which I think is important, very important, because I think people are just not aware. And what I'm really interested in is how can Safer School get more kids organized? Because I think the most amazing thing would be kids just stop going to school.
Still me a piece of pizza.
Yeah, and Marcus is getting more pizza.
It's that time again.
It's that time again, right? How can we organize the students in our schools to just say, okay, this is what we want. You all are not giving it to us. We don't feel safe in this environment, so therefore, we're just not going to class, right? I think that'll be powerful. I think that'll dramatize the issue, but also I think people will really start listening, and parents included, right? You can show up, drop me off, do whatever, but I don't think I'm going inside today, right? Have y'all thought about that? How do you all feel about that? And if that's something that you all are thinking or want to do, how can we make that happen?
Yeah, that's been the hardest part about kind of the timing of when we kind of began as a group, an organization, is that public level public action was almost impossible during COVID.
Right.
it wasn't even a thing where it was
But
like
we back outside now. We back.
So that's the thing is we now have the ability
Right.
to kind of change that.
Right.
So it wasn't even a thing where I think it was the momentum was lacking, or it wasn't the idea that students could be organized like that. It's like I'm not going to ask a kid who's sitting in his room all day listening to his teacher while taking care of his sister and has a job to be like, hey man, can you? Can you put,
It's like circumstances. For
so
sure.
now they're out of that. I think it's the idea is one getting a level where. So there's 2 students now who have officially become honorary. I think they work as honorary members of Metro Council. They're honorary school board members. Sorry, honorary school board members who have a non-voting kind of say in kind of a student opinion when it comes to the school board. I mean, that's something that came out. I think public pressure related not just to us, but other organizations. I think it's a new position as of this year. That's something completely new. So the idea is one, I think getting a kind of relationship with them and figuring out, all right, like what is the capacity of influence you have within a specific role. But beyond that, I think the idea of we're going back outside, having public events, having kind of face-to-face conversations, having the ability to have, I think, a conversation with students in a public forum where we can kind of work with them saying, hey, like, this is what we're about, this is what we're trying to advocate for you. One, this is what you want, and 2, this is what you want. Here are the ways we know. I think most of us, I would say, are kind of literate. We're not an amazing, fantastic superhero organizer like you, Jerome, but we're pretty literate in what it takes to have public action campaigns. So the idea is, here's your options as students to do certain things to kind of get your voices heard and get that out there. That's what you're up to do. We are here to be a resource to help you do that. And I think that's just the thing that has kind of been our momentum going into the next couple months. Now that we can be outside again, because we're working right now on a report to be kind of, we'll keep little details on that. We'll keep that. They'll be surprised when it comes out. But a report to kind of encapsulate, I think, what all these issues are and kind of make them public, and then kind of, I think, creating a movement of students around that. It ultimately could be, I think, the straw that breaks the camel's back. And I mean, like I said, I think the idea of having a report that we can kind of hopefully drop in the coming months, and also kind of create a movement of students around that. Is the goal of me being an optimist. I'm the cynical of the group, so this is a rare thing. Enjoy it, Jerome. But I think just beyond that is we have to, I think, reckon with the fact that this is something that's going to have to be dealt with because Nashville is changing at such a rate. And we're dealing with kind of, I think, these walls being put up and these kind of gaps and disparities being so exacerbated throughout the city as we kind of have this huge influx of population, huge kind of economical change based on our changing kind of economy. Basically, we're a tourist, economy now, which kind of blows my mind, and things like that, where people are going to get so left behind. We're not going to get anything changed, or we're going to have to deal with the cynicism that exists with I've been left behind and the kind of insidious things that become coupled with that. And I think that's what worries me about things like this is if we don't deal with them soon, they're going to become something where there are issues that will not only not be dealt with, but they'll be dealt with too late.
And I think that's something that, like, when we first started this, realizing, like, this has been an issue since before we were alive. And this has been something that, like the way that we discipline our students in Nashville is like above and beyond any other place. And the way that we arrest our students in schools and the way that we go about discipline is something that has been an issue for years and years and years, and nothing has happened. And I think that drove a lot of our work. Like, why is there a report from 2003 that says the same exact things that we're talking about? Like, why has it been my entire life and nothing has changed? And what is that, like, where do we go from here? How do we build people power? Because these politicians are sending us in circles. How do we connect with parents? How do we get administrators on board? Because alternative programs don't work if the principal is not on board. And that's what we've seen at some of these high schools that have restorative justice, but not everybody is on board. So it's sort of this, it's become a little bit of a joke. And it's just like, this is something, like, why can't we do something about this? Let's do something about this.
And I kind of, that brings us to, like, the question of, like, who are y'all allies and who are the adversaries?
Well, and this is another one of my politician answers.
No, we don't want those, Marcus. We want the real, uncut, raw. It's deep these conversations, man.
We try not to be adversarial with. I'll actually rephrase that. We try not to be adversarial with anyone in particular when it comes to how we deal with this issue.
Just call it what it is.
But the issue I'm saying is the issue that we run into is it becomes incredibly hard and frustrating to be as good-willed about what we're trying to do when we're dealing with a situation where we've been blatantly lied to by public officials.
Who lied? Oh, okay.
We've been blatantly, as you said, run around by public officials. We've had, I think, the disrespect of this is a non-issue for me, despite being someone who has constituent within the exact kind of area
Who
of this
are
issue.
some of the public officials?
I mean, we're slightly involved, but the police department at one point was ready to say, hey, we'll get rid of cops.
Don't throw me in this, Marcus. I wasn't a part of those conversations.
But I mean, the police department at one point was ready, we're like, yeah, we're ready to, in the near future, approach removing SROs. We need those officers back in the streets. We would like to have people who are in the best positions to deal with our students put in schools.
That is accurate.
And after a weird meeting with the mayor and the school board, they then said, like, oh, yeah, so we're going to have more cops in schools, we're going to have an increase, and we're going to have them have a larger role with students after saying the complete opposite. So there's a position in my life where I've, for the first time, lied to my face by a public official. That's not happened before.
And talk about, like...
Get used to it.
Yeah, I don't know where that is. It happened once, was sobering. Now I expect it every turn.
So naive.
And talk about, like, people making decisions for other people without consulting them. I mean, we have a survey from 2018 where we have, I think it's 22% of people, this survey by the Metro Nashville government, that 22% of people are satisfied with SROs, and something like 8% in North Nashville through 7208 are satisfied with SROs. Like, they've asked the general public. Like, they're doing these things against people's will.
That tends to happen. They ask just to say they ask and kind of do what they want to do anyway. Just to see, and I think that goes back to, like, I think what Marcus had mentioned earlier, as far as, like, the disrespect of, like, how non-serious that they're taking people's like statements and opinions in lives, right? You ask a question and you act like you're listening, but your actions say something otherwise. And
I think after CNN did, I can't remember the name of the program, but they did obviously expose on 372 having the highest incarceration rate in the country. That's zip code. And that should have been a national embarrassment for everyone involved in the local government in the city. And the way I think that pisses me off is the way it just kind of became that's terrible. And then we move on into that same budgetary cycle where we still haven't had needs. So you talk about allies. We do a lot of work with Gideon's RV, Nashville People's Budget, National People's Budget Coalition, Workers' Dignity, a lot of public organizations who advocate for not only just things beyond schooling, but workers' rights, affordable housing, dealing with disparities in crime and policing in the city, things like that are incredibly kind of in tune and associated with education in its own specific ways. I think all of these things, what people realize are connected, and the idea of dealing with them is important, I think, as a wholesale issue, because if we fix affordable housing, we, to a degree, fix dealing with disciplinary issues in school to a degree. That instability is incredibly related to...
Interconnected.
Yeah.
For sure.
So, and the idea is we deal with over-policing in the community, we can then have an easier discussion about over-policing in schools. Because they're all very much in tune and connected. So we work with these organizations a lot, and I think what's been I keep using this word, but it's true, frustrating, is, like I said, is that kind of the ability as public figures to kind of just have it shit roll right off your back. And the
it's
idea
amazing.
It's
amazing how they can do it.
It's almost a skill. It's almost a skill.
It is definitely a skill. Like how they can... Politicians can sit up there to your face, tell you a lie, like as if like that with a smile, poking a smile, and then like do the complete like opposite. Like it is definitely a skill, and it takes an amazing person to be able to do that and like continue their daily life as if like they're not harming people, right? How can people support safer schools?
I mean, so we're not incorporated, so we can't take your money and not...
I will take your money. Nah.
We will be soon. Hopefully.
But we will be soon.
But how can somebody like even that like that's like it
that's
could be
just one way.
Yeah, that's just one way. Like and it might be somebody that may want to help you all with their process. Yeah. So that's like becoming a nonprofit.
We're steadily on the way. So that's something I hope will happen in the next month or so.
I think hit us up on our Instagram. It's just Safer Schools Nashville. If you're interested in getting involved, if you're a young person, if you're a parent, if you're a teacher, just DM us.
Yeah, the biggest thing for us is we And I think people shy away from this when it comes to like public organizations because they're like, oh, who knows what happens as soon as we start letting anybody in. But we kind of want as many voices as possible within our heads when we're making decisions.
Right.
I mean, there's about 7, 8 of us, and we, I think I'm happy to be around these incredibly competent, way more competent than I am, people all the time. And that has been made this process, I think, a lot easier for all of us because we just have the ability to bounce these ideas off each other.
Right.
But we have a level of diversity based on our backgrounds that is helpful, but
Right.
we always want more.
Right.
The idea is, I think, like you said, follow Sabre Schools Nashville on Facebook, Sabre Schools Nashville on Instagram, and on Twitter. Follow us not just to have that follow count. We don't
Right.
care about that. Follow us and DM us. Follow us
Right.
and interact with our posts.
Become
Follow
active,
us
yeah.
and contact us
Right.
if you have things to say or opinions. And I'm not saying if it's just a thing where it's you
Right.
agree with us, you disagree with us, you have questions.
Right.
That ability to kind of have that
Ask
conversation.
questions.
Yeah.
It's you can't be an organization that deems itself advocates for
Right.
anyone,
Right.
and then not have the conversation. That's exactly the issue we're talking about with the politicians you were just mentioning. You cannot have a position and role where you're saying I'm going to advocate for a group of people or a specific
Right.
region of Tennessee, so Middle Tennessee, and not have the ability to have
Right.
a conversation with people who are there. So
And-
we're gonna do the exact opposite of those people. We're
Right.
going to have as much contact as possible with everyone and anyone.
And I would say too, y'all definitely check out their website in their information because they have a lot of research. They just they've done the work, the boots on the ground, done the work, and if you question the research, they're very accessible.
You got to deal with me.
Yeah, you got to deal with Marcus. Yeah, or Isabella, the legal.
Yeah.
Isabella's probably scarier than me.
Yeah, for sure,
Honestly,
definitely.
yeah.
Definitely.
Any last words? Any information that you all want to leave with the folks that are watching to kind of like just end this out? Yeah, Emma.
Yeah, I think that something that I like to reground myself in is how serious this work is,
Right.
and I think sometimes in those conversations with politicians, we forget how sacred these young people's lives are, and we've seen in this year someone in a young person in Knoxville lose their life.
Right.
To having someone with a cop in a school, and I don't think that I'm ready to wait for something like that to happen in MNPS. And just bringing that home that this is life or death, and these are our babies. This is our city, and this is something that we can't just feel wishy-washy about.
Let's not be reactionary. Let's be proactive.
Yeah.
I think I always say this to people as a way to, I think, reemphasize it for people who grew up here who are native Nashvilleians and for this influx of kind of newer people who don't say hi to me when I walk past them on the street. But this is our city. I think there's a disconnect, and I think, like she said, our city. There's a disconnect, and I think a bit of a dissociation when it comes to the new and the old, and we can't have that to survive as a city.
Right.
And this is something where disagreements and different perspectives and different viewpoints and different opinions exist,
Right.
but we have to do what's right, and I think
Right.
at a base level, and it's me being optimistic again. It's crazy, Jerome. You got 2 optimistic moments out of me in one,
Hey
in one
man,
day.
that's what I do, man.
It's
I
a
bring
huge-
when people come on here, man, they think they're gonna go one way, and
Yep.
it goes to complete next. It's the pizza, man. I'm trying to tell
I think it's the pizza.
It's
I'm
the
in a
pizza,
great mood
man.
after the pizza. But I think it's something where I think we all know what's right. I think we all
Right.
know what makes the most sense. I think we all know what we have to do. And it's, I think having that coalition, having the idea of saying, if we're all going to coexist, because that's my biggest, you asked me earlier about joining Sabre Schools. My biggest thing was the disparities that exist based on just new to old. And that's something I went to California for college. I visited not as much as my mom would have liked. I was very rarely came back. So I came back, man, and I've been here about 2 months now, and it's a completely different place.
Right.
And the idea of how that to some people is very cool. I get that. But that to me is, so who the hell are we leaving behind, and what the hell are we going to do for them? And so I think having that coalition of, I get that there's a difference in who lives here now,
Right.
but all of us have to understand that there's a right way to
Right.
deal with our students, there's a
Right.
right way to deal with our city, and there's a right way to treat each other.
Right.
And if we can approach that at a public level, at a private level, and at a neighborly, systemic level, then our city's doomed no matter how big it gets.
Right.
And that's something I take as an existential crisis. So that's my biggest thing, and hopefully something I guess we can get across with my neighbors who have started saying hello to me. So,
Well, I appreciate you both for coming on Deep Dish Conversations and giving us these facts and really pouring your heart out and giving people the opportunity to really be informed about what's happening and what's not happening and what needs to happen. So it's an opportunity for people to get involved, at least find out how they can get involved and what part they can play in this. And I always like to, talk about solutions, because it's easy to identify the problems, right? But I like that you all identify some solutions to the problem and some solutions how people can get involved to remedy the problem. So I appreciate Safer Schools Nashville for joining us. Hope you all enjoyed the pizza.
Yes, I did.
Thank you all for tuning in, and I hope you all enjoyed it and learned something. I know I did, and I'm involved, and I learned some new stuff. So I know you learned something, even if you didn't think you caught some nuggets. But definitely check out Safer Schools Nashville, Instagram, Facebook, website. All the information to be somewhere on the screen. And thank you all for tuning in. And thank you both for being here. Like, it was amazing.
Thank you for having us.
Nice meeting you in person.
I know.
Nice meeting you all in person. Yeah. But we out. Appreciate y'all, man.
Thanks
Thank
so much.
you.
Yeah. That's a wrap.